I can still see my brother's blood staining the wooden floor as my father looked at me with empty eyes and told me I was the only one left in his family. And that's when I realized my real nightmare was just beginning. I wonder how you're watching my life story. So please subscribe to the channel and like this video. My name is Emily Grace Harper. But everyone in Fairview, that little spot in the Kentucky countryside, knows me as Nana M. I'm the old lady who sells homemade pies at the farmer's market on Sundays. And I've reached 84 years, with hair as white as cotton and hands calloused from decades of hard work. Folks who see me now, always smiling and giving gifts to the children, could never imagine the story of pain and endurance I carry in my heart. I was born in 1941 in a simple wooden house on a small farm about 5 miles from town. And we didn't have much. Just about 30 acres, mostly of scrubland. But we had some good soil for growing wheat, pumpkins, and tomatoes when the rain came just right. And we kept a few livestock, chickens running around the yard, and an old mule named Rusty who pulled our cart into town. My father, Charles Reed, was a strict, quiet man with high expectations, and from a young age, he taught my brother Nathan how to work the fields and manage the small businesses he ran, starting with a roadside stand at our driveway. Then it grew to a small feed store for the neighbors, and finally a hardware shop in town. And Nathan was his pride, like a reflection of himself, the continuation of his legacy in the world. A man without a son to carry on is like a tree without roots, not leaving any mark on the world. That's what my father would say after a few sips of whiskey following dinner as he philosophized about life. My role was to help my mother with the housework, learning to cook, as dough, as clay, make soap, and preserve food. Because a woman needs to know how to keep a neat house and make her husband happy. My mother, Margaret, always taught me with her head bowed, agreeing with everything my father said. And Nathan was 10 years older than me, a handsome young man with a charming smile and slanted eyes he got from our grandmother. They say she had Cherokee blood, and unlike my father, he was so good to me, bringing candy from town, teaching me how to whistle, and telling ghost stories that made me pull the blankets up to my neck on winter nights. When I think back on all of that, I remember how I'd take care of him. And he promised he'd build me a pretty house with a wide porch and a fully equipped kitchen. But fate is a tricky beast that doesn't respect plans or promises. And in 1958, when I was 17 and Nathan was 27, the measles swept through our area like a storm, taking lives everywhere. It started with the school-aged children and then the adults who hadn't had it as kids. And Nathan was one of them. At first, he just had a fever and a few red spots on his face, and he said it was nothing, being stubborn like our father and refusing to stay in bed. He kept working at the shop, getting wet in the rain and not sleeping well. And within 3 days, the fever spiked so high that he started delirious, calling out to people who weren't there and yelling that his back was burning like fire. Finally, my father agreed to take him to town. But the roads were so muddy from the rain that the Jeep got stuck twice. When we finally reached the clinic, The doctor just shook his head and said he had pneumonia on top of the measles. 3 days later, Nathan passed away in that stuffy room, smelling of medicine and suffering. And he didn't even have the strength to say a proper goodbye. He just squeezed my hand, looked into my eyes, and whispered, "Take care of Mom, Em." And then he was gone, taking all of my father's dreams with him. The funeral was quick, like most things in a small town, with a simple pine coffin lowered into the red clay soil of the city cemetery while the preacher mumbled hasty prayers. My father didn't shed a single tear. He just stood there like a stone statue, hat in hand, staring into the hole that swallowed his only son. My mother cried quietly, leaning on me, her legs growing weaker with every shovelful of dirt. And we went back home in a heavy silence that seemed to choke our thoughts. Little did I know that silence was just the calm before the storm. And for a whole week, my father hardly left his room. He barely ate or spoke to anyone, and I often heard him pacing at night, the floorboards creaking under his heavy steps. Sometimes the clinking of glass told me he was drinking from that hidden bottle in the cabinet. And on the 7th night after the funeral, I woke up to a loud crash. I ran into the living room in my nightgown and saw my father standing in the middle of the house. The table overturned, dishes broken on the floor, and blood everywhere. I'll never forget that blood, flowing from a deep cut on his hand where a piece of glass had stabbed him. And he yelled, "It doesn't mean anything anymore. Why build? Why work? Why save if I have no one to pass it to?" My mother tried to calm him, speaking softly and approaching like someone nearing an angry dog. "We have her, Charles," she said. "We have Emblem." That's when he turned those empty eyes on me and said the words that changed my life forever. "A woman? What will she do with all I've built? She'd just give it to the first man who comes along. No, Margaret. I only have her now, and she'll have to serve some purpose." A chill ran down my spine. I didn't fully understand what he meant, but something inside me, like a bird sensing a snake, warned me I was in danger. That night, as I cleaned up the mess my father made, I whispered to those who might be watching, "If you could leave a comment saying where you're watching this video from, it gives me strength knowing someone is listening after all these years. Please like the channel so more people can know that we can survive even the worst nightmares." And in the days that followed, my father started to change. He looked at me strangely during meals and began insisting I learn about the business, go with him to the shop in town, and understand accounting, up to, and inventory. He said, "If you're going to inherit all this, you need to know how to take care of it." But there was no care in his words, just anger. Like each explanation was an accusation. "You're not Nathan. You'll never be like him." And in the evenings after dinner, he started drinking more than usual. The bourbon went from 1 or 2 sips to 1 or 2 full bottles. And with the drink came the violence. First against objects, smashing things, punching walls, kicking doors. Then against my mother, a shove here, a slap there, always followed by senseless accusations like, "It's your fault. You didn't take care of him properly when he was little. She just bowed her head and accepted it all as if she deserved it. And I tried to intervene, stepping between them and pushing them apart. But it didn't make much difference compared to what was coming. 3 weeks after Nathan's funeral, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of the door creaking. At first, I thought it was my mother coming to tuck me in on a cold night. But the strong smell of bourbon and sweat quickly warned me it was my father, stumbling in the dark toward my bed. "Nathan," he whispered softly, his voice slurred from the alcohol. "My son." And I froze in fear, pretending to sleep and praying he'd realize his mistake and leave. But he sat on the edge of the bed, the straw mattress sinking under his weight, and ran his hand through my hair. "You're back?" he murmured. "I knew you'd come back." And when I tried to move and say I was Emily, not Nathan, he gripped my arm tightly. "Don't go again. You're all I have." What happened that night? With the wind howling through the window and crickets chirping outside, was the start of a torment that lasted nearly 2 years. A torment no 17-year-old girl should ever go through, especially from the man who was supposed to protect her. When the sun rose, bringing freshness to chase away the night's monsters, my father went back to his room, leaving me broken inside, crying silently so as not to wake the house. I couldn't get up to make coffee as usual. I just lay there wrapped in the blood-stained sheet, feeling ashamed and wishing the earth would swallow me like it had my brother. My mother came into the room hours later, worried about my absence, and just by looking, she understood, her eyes welling up with tears. She raised her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob, but she didn't say anything. She just sat on the edge of the bed and held my hand for a long time. "He's suffering so much, dear," she finally whispered, as if that explained or justified what had happened. "The loss of Nathan has him all twisted up. It'll pass." But it didn't pass. It was just the first night of many where the monster I once called father would come into my room, sometimes calling me Nathan, other times knowing exactly who I was, but saying terrible things, that I had to make up for the son he lost, that I owed him this for raising me. And so my torment began in the house that used to be home and had become a prison, with a man whose pain and bourbon had turned him into a monster, and a mother who, out of fear or helplessness, pretended not to see what was happening under her own roof. The pain of those days still tightens my chest when I recall it, even after all these years. And it feels like it was just yesterday, not back in 1958, when my life was turned upside down by Nathan's death. The days dragged on, and my father grew worse, like fruit rotting from the inside out. And in the first few weeks, he still pretended around outsiders, wearing the mask of a respectable family man grieving his son. The neighbors would bring food, coffee, and condolences. And sometimes the preacher would come to read prayers and say that God knows what he's doing. Things people say when they don't know what else to say. And no one suspected what was happening behind closed doors. It was just the 3 of us in that isolated house. I remember one Sunday when Mr. Carter, the grocer in town, visited with his whole family, and they even brought a pie his wife had made. My father was polite, offering coffee and talking about the weather, the crops, and how hard it was to run the shop without Nathan. I sat quietly in the corner serving guests, avoiding eye contact with anyone. And when Mr. Carter asked if I was taking over the family business, my father gave a fake smile. What does a woman know about business? Mr. Carter, she'd help me until I find a worthy son-in-law. And then I'd hand everything over to him. Back then, people thought that was normal. No, Nash. And Mr. Carter's daughter even commented that I looked tired. But his wife quickly cut her off. It's because of her brother's sadness. Dear, leave her be. If they knew the real reason for the dark circles under my eyes and why I flinched when anyone got too close, by July 1958, my father had his first real breakdown. The kind even the farthest neighbors noticed. And it was corn harvest time. So he hired workers to help in the fields. One early morning, one of the men, Big Tom, came to the house to report that part of the crop was destroyed, with all the corn ears lying on the ground as if someone had pulled them up on purpose. My father turned pale as a sheet, started trembling, his eyes bulging. And suddenly he let out a yell that would scare even spirits in purgatory. It's him. It's Nathan. He's angry with me. And he ran out into the field, knocking over more corn as he went, yelling my brother's name and begging for forgiveness. The men had to restrain him by force and bring him home. And it turned out it was just a pack of wild pigs that had raided the field at night. But in my father's muddled mind, it was a sign from the other side. And after that, his madness became harder to hide. At the hardware shop in town, he'd yell in customers' faces, thinking they were trying to cheat him, accuse employees of stealing without evidence. He started seeing Nathan's shadow everywhere behind stacks of bricks in the dark corner of the warehouse, hiding among the bags of cement. Before long, customers thinned out. No one wanted to deal with a man who suddenly talked to thin air, dropped goods in a rage. One day, he'd sell on credit with a smile. And the next, he'd threaten the same customer with a knife if they came for change. And around that time, the town pharmacist, Mr. Walsh, prescribed medicine for my father. Some white pills in a dark bottle with a Latin label. It's to soothe the nerves, he said. And my mother tried to slip them into his coffee secretly. But he always suspected, trying to poison me. Are you thinking I don't know what you and your daughter are plotting? One time, he threw the hot coffee in her face, leaving a red burn on her cheek that never fully healed. And yet she kept defending him, telling everyone it wasn't his fault, that the grief had taken over his mind. And one night, as we were applying hog fat to her back where a belt had left bruises, I gently asked, "Margaret, why don't we leave here? We could go to Aunt Clara's in Lexington. You always said she invited us." But she just shook her head, her eyes downcast, her voice almost gone. "And leave your father sick like this. What would people think? No, dear, men are men. We have to endure. That's what God wants." She paused, touching her tired face. "Besides, where would I go with a daughter like you, one who's no longer fit for marriage?" Those words cut deeper than any belt. She knew what had been happening in my room at night. She knew, but did nothing. Worse, she thought the shame was mine, not his. And back then, a girl who wasn't pure, no matter the reason, was seen as ruined. Who would want to marry her? And if not married, what future would she have? I swallowed my tears and the growing hate inside me. Hate, not just for my father, but for my mother. For life, for God. For everything and everyone that allowed this to happen. And with the business in town failing, my father spent more time at home. That only made things worse. Now, I feared not just the nights, but the days too. Whenever my mother went out to the well or picked vegetables in the garden, he could appear, the cheap bourbon smell announcing him even before his heavy footsteps. And sometimes he'd say, "You look just like your mother when she was young." "But you have Nathan's determination." "Yes, there's a part of him in you." I always knew that by the end of 1958, I discovered I was carrying a child. For nearly 2 months, I tried to hide it as much as I could, wearing loose clothes, tying a belt around my belly, and avoiding eating too much in front of others so I wouldn't get sick afterward. But a woman's body can't keep secrets forever. And of course, my mother was the first to notice. She saw me bathing in the back room, where we had a makeshift tin shower. And she walked in without knocking, as she always did, and stared at my belly, which was starting to show. "How long?" she asked. "Er voice dry?" And I said, "I think about 2 months." She was silent for a long time, standing there like stone, an nåldrag in her hand, eyes fixed on my belly. "Your father can't know," she finally said, more to herself than to me. "He'd kill us. Kill all 3 of us." It was the first time I saw her openly admit how dangerous he was, that he could do something even worse than what he had done. "And what will we do?" I asked, my voice trembling as I instinctively covered my belly. And there was an old woman in Coal Hollow named Mrs. Jensen, who handled problems like this. My blood ran cold. I'd heard stories about old Mrs. Jensen from other women. Go to her and come back, no longer pregnant and bleeding. Some never had children again. Others never came back at all. No, Mother, I won't do that. It's my child. It's your child. Daughter. The child of sin. Yes. The fruit of abomination," she yelled, losing control for the first time. "Do you want to raise a monster born from this? A child twisted with a tail and horns. Those superstitions were strong back then. People believed children from such relations were cursed, marked by sin. I don't know. Mother, I just know I won't kill it before it has a chance to be born." The conversation ended there with her storming out, slamming the door, and me crying alone, the cold bath water mixing with my hot tears. In the weeks that followed, she tried everything. Pennyroyal tea, cinnamon tea, hot baths, making me jump off chairs and carry heavy buckets, all in hopes of ending the pregnancy. Nothing worked. And surprisingly, my father didn't notice. He was so lost in his own madness, talking to Nathan as if he were sitting at the table, fighting invisible enemies and spending days locked in his room with his bottles and personal demons. And on Christmas night in 1958, everything exploded. He'd been to town and came back drunker than usual, carrying a package. And he called everyone into the living room, including the 2 workers still at the farm, old Big Tom, who tended the animals, and Nellie, who helped my mother in the house. Tonight's a special night, he declared, staggering, his voice slurred. Tonight, my son Nathan gets a gift. And he unwrapped the package and pulled out a new pair of leather boots, the expensive kind only landowners wore, boots that would never fit a dead man buried for months. "Where is he? Where's my son?" he started yelling, looking around as if expecting Nathan to suddenly appear. "I know he's here. I can smell him." And old Joe tried to calm him, saying Nathan was gone and he should rest. But my father grabbed the oil lamp lighting the room and threw it at him. Luckily, he ducked in time. The lamp exploded against the wall, and the flame spread quickly over the old dry wallpaper. In minutes, the room was engulfed in fire, and we all ran out except my father, who kept yelling Nathan's name, saying he'd save his son from the flames. It was Nellie who ran in and dragged him out before the roof collapsed. And he came out with singed clothes and hair, but still alive. We could do nothing but watch our house turn to ashes. The well was too far, and even if we'd had enough water, the fire had already consumed everything. We lost almost everything that night. Furniture, clothes, memories, the little money we had saved in a tin box under my parents' bed. We spent the rest of the night in the barn, huddled on straw, covered with rags that Limping Joe had gathered. The saddest Christmas I ever had. The next morning, still in shock, staring at the smoking ruins of what was once our home. Finally, "You've made the decision you should have made long ago," my mother said. "It's over, Charles," she said firmly, in a way I'd never heard before. And my father sat on a tree stump, his eyes blankly staring into nothing. The rage from the night before had been replaced by a frightening apathy. He didn't even respond. "We'll go to my sister's in Lexington," my mother continued. "There's a real doctor there, a hospital. You'll get better, and we'll start over." I didn't know if it was the sight of the destroyed house, the shock of nearly dying in the fire, or just exhaustion from fighting his demons. But he just nodded weakly like a child. And 2 days later, we boarded the rattling bus to Lexington, leaving behind the ruins of our old life and Nathan's grave. That was the only place my father insisted on visiting before we left. And what we didn't know was we were just trading one hell for another. In Lexington, away from the land where he grew up, and from his beloved son's grave. My father's condition would only get worse. And as for me, with my growing belly, I felt weaker than ever. It was there, in that strange city, in Aunt Clara's cramped house, that I learned sometimes you have to kill a part of yourself to survive. And that's where I began planning my revenge. Not a bloody, fiery revenge, but something far more ruthless, something that would free not just me, but my mother and my children from the man who had destroyed so many lives. Lexington wasn't the paradise my mother had promised. Aunt Clara's house was cramped, a small 2-story place on a back street behind the market, where the smell of cured meat and leather drifted in through the windows, along with dust and the noise of vendors. The 4 of us squeezed into 2 tiny rooms. I didn't even have private space to cry alone. And Aunt Clara was the opposite of my mother. A widow for years who ran her own small household goods store and had an opinion on everything. She was the first to notice my belly, which had become hard to hide. "Margaret, is this girl pregnant? Or am I going blind?" she asked one afternoon as I was washing dishes in the kitchen. The silence that followed was heavier than lead. My mother looked down at the floor, her hands trembling in her apron. "Yes, sister, the shame is complete." "Who's the father?" Aunt Clara asked, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. And another silence, ever heavier. My mother couldn't bring herself to speak. "I think it was one of the farm workers," she said, and Aunt Clara looked at me with eyes that seemed to see right through me. She didn't say anything, but I knew she didn't believe my mother. A week later, without telling anyone, she came home with a man in a black suit carrying a leather bag. A real doctor, not the folk healers we consulted back home. "Dr. Harper will examine Charles," she announced. "And Emily too. I won't have anyone sick in my house." My father, who had spent the day sitting on a couch in the yard, staring into space and talking to himself, barely reacted as the doctor examined him. He answered a few questions in a weak voice. Let them take his blood pressure. Look at his tongue. Tap his knee with that rubber hammer. Then it was my turn. My mother tried to stay in the room, but Aunt Clara was firm. "Let the doctor work. Margaret, go make us some coffee." Alone with the doctor, I shook with fear. I'd never been examined by a strange man like this, especially in my condition. But Dr. Harper was gentle and respectful. He explained everything he was going to do before he did it. And when he finished, his eyes were sad, making me look down. "Do you know who the father is?" he asked gently. And I shook my head, too ashamed to tell the truth. "How far along are you?" "I think about 4 months." "And do you want to keep the pregnancy?" The question surprised me. No one had asked me that before. My mother just assumed I should end it. My father didn't know or pretended not to. And here this man treated the decision as if it were mine. "Yes, I know," I answered softly but firmly, and he nodded, writing something on a paper and handing it to me. "These are vitamins. You're weak and anemic. You need to eat better for the baby." And as we left the room, my mother and Aunt Clara were waiting in the living room, tense as violin strings. Dr. Harper got straight to the point. "Your husband, Mrs. Grace, has a severe nervous disorder. He needs to be taken to an institution for proper treatment." An institution, my mother repeated in horror. "The insane asylum. A mental hospital is the accurate term," the doctor patiently corrected. "He's having delusions, hallucinations, possibly from grief, but they could worsen without treatment." And then he glanced at me. As for your daughter, she needs prenatal care. She's anemic and malnourished." And it was like a bomb exploded in that small room. Aunt Clara put her hands on her hips, staring at my mother. "Margaret, tell me this isn't what I think it is." My mother collapsed into a chair, defeated. "What do you want me to do?" "Clara, he's my husband, her father. And that gives him the right to do this." Aunt Clara didn't finish the sentence. "Tu orifid." She turned to the doctor. "Doctor, what's happened to my niece? It's a crime, isn't it?" The doctor looked from one to the other, finally understanding what no one had said out loud. "If it's what I think, yes. It's one of the gravest crimes, and I'll report it. I'll call the police." And Clara said, tears of anger in her eyes, "You can," the doctor replied hesitantly. "But think what that means for the young girl and the baby she's carrying. Such situations often become gossip, talk." "And what do you suggest?" Aunt Clara asked, and her voice shaking. "This man needs to be institutionalized." "Certainly. We can arrange the admission without mentioning the other issue. Just say he's delusional, that he tried to burn the house, that he's a danger to himself and others. And so, one rainy morning in February, 1959, 2 men came to take my father away, and he didn't even resist. He was so deep in his madness that he barely registered what was happening. He just got into the ambulance, looking up at the sky, whispering Nathan's name. As the ambulance turned the corner, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders, like I could finally breathe after months of suffocation. I looked at my mother, expecting to see the same relief. But what I saw was a mix of guilt, shame, and worst of all, anger. "Satisfied," she whispered as Aunt Clara walked in. "Now everyone knows. How could you do that to your father?" I was speechless. How could she blame me? How could she defend that man after all he'd done? But I soon understood. My mother was a product of her time. Women were taught from a young age to accept, to be silent, to endure. Men are like that. They say, women have to put up with it. You must have done something to make him angry. He raped his own daughter. "Mother," I whispered, finally using the right word for what happened. "And you knew. You let it happen." She slapped me. The only gift she ever gave me in her life. "Don't you ever say that again. Your father is sick. He didn't know what he was doing." Aunt Clara appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the yelling. "If you hit her again, Margaret, you're the one leaving this house, not her." That was the start of a cold war that lasted months. My mother hardly spoke to me, as if I'd betrayed the family by having him institutionalized. She spent her days crying in corners, visiting him at the institution whenever she could, and coming back saying he was improving and would soon be home with us. Meanwhile, my belly grew bigger. Aunt Clara took me to see Dr. Harper, bought fabric for maternity clothes, and even started preparing a crib for the baby. To explain my situation to neighbors and acquaintances, she made up a story that I was a widow. that my husband had died in a farm accident right after our wedding. Back then, being a widow was more accepted than being a single mother. And during one of those checkups, when I was 6 months along, Dr. Harper told me news that changed everything. "You're expecting twins?" "Emily." And I nearly fell out of the chair. Twins. How on earth would I raise 2 children when I could barely imagine raising one? "Doctor..." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. You can hear 2 little heartbeats." And I left the office in a daze, hands on my belly, which now made more sense being so large. Aunt Clara, waiting in the lobby, saw my face and immediately asked what happened. "Auntie, there are 2 babies." Her eyes widened. She crossed herself, and then smiled in a way that surprised me. "Only God knows what He's doing. Girl, it'll be hard, but we'll manage." That night, lying on the narrow bed with my mother, who slept turned away from me as usual, I felt the babies move for the first time. Not the faint flutters I'd felt before, but full kicks and punches. Abuse happened, but fate had another plan for me. One cold May morning in 1961, I was called urgently to the ward. A new patient had been brought in, critically ill. When I walked into the room and saw who it was, my blood ran cold. It was my mother, pale as wax, with blue lips and struggling to breathe. What had happened, I asked. The nurse was caring for her. It seemed like a heart problem. Her sister had brought her to the hospital. She said my mother suddenly collapsed in the kitchen. I rushed to her side and took her cold hand. "Mother, it's me. Emily, can you hear me?" She slowly opened her eyes. She had trouble focusing on me. "Emily, forgive me," she whispered. "Forgive what, mother?" "Don't talk. Just rest. I need to tell you," she said, squeezing my hand with surprising strength for someone so weak. "Your father is not who you think." She didn't finish the sentence. Her eyes rolled back and her whole body shook violently. Then she went still. The doctors tried to revive her, but it was too late. They said it was a sudden heart attack. It was quick, and there was no chance of survival. I stood there holding her still, warm hand, trying to understand what she wanted to say in her last moments. "Your father. He is not..." Right, that unfinished phrase haunted me for months and years until I finally uncovered the truth. She was almost gone. The funeral was simple, just like Nathan's. Except this time it was raining, a light drizzle that looked like tears from heaven. Aunt Clara cried a lot and clung tightly to my arm. The twins were too young to understand, so they stayed home with a neighbor. After my mother passed, something changed inside me. It was like the last thread tying me to the past had broken. Now it was just me, my children, and whatever future we could build. And of course, there was one last issue to deal with. My father was still in the institution, still casting a shadow over our lives. A week after the funeral, Aunt Clara called me for a serious talk. "Emily, your mother wanted me to tell you this if anything happened to her." I promised not to say anything while she was alive. But now I sat down with my heart pounding. Was this the rest of that final sentence cut short by death? About your father, she continued, her voice trembling. About what he did to her, I already knew that. No, it's about who he really is. She paused as if gathering her courage. Charles is not your biological father. Emily, it felt like the ground disappeared under my feet. That couldn't be right. There must be some mistake. What do you mean? Of course he is. He's always been that way. Your mother never. Your mother was only 16 when she met a young man in the city, a law student on vacation in the area. They fell in love. And you know how these things happen. When your mother found out she was pregnant, that young man went back to Chattanooga. Her family, my parents, were furious. They arranged a hasty marriage with Charles, a farm supervisor nearby who had claims on the land my father would leave as inheritance. He agreed to marry her even though he knew she was pregnant with another man's child. He did it on the condition that no one would ever know the truth. That the child, which is you, would be registered as his daughter. And that's how it was done. And my biological father, did he ever know about me? Aunt Clara shook her head sadly. Your mother tried to contact him when she knew she was pregnant. She sent letters but got no reply. Years later, we found out he had married a girl from a good family, become a judge, and moved to Philadelphia. Thousands of questions exploded in my mind. Why didn't my mother ever tell me? Why keep this secret? Until her death. And if my biological father is still out there somewhere, not knowing he has a daughter and 2 grandsons, why didn't she tell me? Especially after everything that happened, Aunt Clara took my hand, her eyes full of old sadness. I think it was shame and fear, dear. Fear that you would blame her for hiding it. Fear that you would go looking for this man and find out he never wanted to know about you. And then when Charles did what he did, I think she was even more afraid that you would think she let it happen because he wasn't your real father. Suddenly, everything made a terrible new sense. The way my father looked at me with hatred when I was born, a girl instead of the boy he wanted, his obsession with Nathan, his only son, the ease with which he crossed those unforgivable lines, abusing the daughter he never truly saw as his own, and my mother, her silence, her guilt, her helplessness in protecting me. It all took on a new meaning. Not just fear of a violent husband, but fear that a secret kept for decades would be exposed. That night, alone in my small room behind the hospital, I cried out all the tears I had left, for the girl I used to be, for my lost mother, for the father I never knew, and for my children who now carried the blood of a man who wasn't even their real grandfather. As the sun rose, an idea formed in my mind. It was a perfect idea, just and full of revenge. So much so that I almost smiled thinking about it. The revenge I had dreamed of for so long was now within reach. And it would be more complete than I ever imagined. But to make it happen, I needed help. And the right person had just come into my life. James, the young pharmacist who seemed more and more interested in building a future with me. Despite my complicated past, What I didn't know was that my revenge would take a direction I couldn't have imagined, even in my wildest dreams. And the price I would pay would be much higher than I could accept. The fact that Charles wasn't my biological father changed everything. It was like a puzzling mystery, finally revealing its complete picture. The pieces fit together. Why he always favored Nathan. Why he looked at me with that false anger even when I was little. Why he so easily crossed those unforgivable boundaries. In his sick mind, I wasn't really his daughter. I was just living proof of my mother's betrayal. An intruder in the family he was forced to accept. My plan for revenge came from this revelation. It wouldn't be a bloody revenge. I wouldn't stain my hands like he stained his soul. It would be something more subtle, morte, something that would take away from him the only thing that still mattered. His name, his inheritance, his legacy. James and I grew closer during this time. He was a different kind of man from anyone I had known. Educated, gentle, patient with my children. When I finally gathered the courage to tell him my whole story, the real one, not the widow version everyone believed, I thought he would be disgusted and turn away. But what I saw was compassion and rightful anger. Not at me, but at Charles. That man has to pay for what he did, James said, holding my hand, not just to you, but to your mother and your children. He's already paying, I replied. Locked in the mental hospital, losing his mind more each day. But it's not enough. I want him to know he failed completely, that he left nothing for this world. James understood right away. As a pharmacist, he knew doctors, and Towa, and people who could help us carry out our plan. And so we began the journey to legally destroy the man who ruined my childhood. The first step was finding a lawyer in Chattanooga. Mr. Lawson, an old friend of James's. I explained my situation, the truth about my birth, the abuse I endured, the twins born from that violence, and my desire to sever all legal ties with Charles. Exactly what do you want? Ma'am, the lawyer asked after listening in silence. I want to change my name and my children's names. I don't want anything from that man. No last name, no land, no money. I want it to be as if we never existed with him. Mr. Lawson explained that this would be complicated. We needed to prove that Charles wasn't my biological father, but without paternity tests, which were rare back then. It would be nearly impossible. We would have to prove the abuse, which meant exposing the whole story in court. That would put me under public scrutiny and judgment. Emily, are you sure you want to go through with this? It will be painful. And one day when they grow up, the children will ask questions. Yes, I answered without hesitation. I want my children to know the truth when they're old enough to understand, rather than grow up with the name of a wicked man. While we prepared the legal paperwork, I kept working at the hospital. There. Είμαι Dr. Bennett. Ah, Bennett. A young doctor who had come to work in the psychiatric ward. We quickly became friends. I helped him with consultations. He taught me about mental illnesses and new treatments. One afternoon, as we talked about a patient, I mentioned that my father was in a sanitarium in Lexington. "What a coincidence," he said. "I'm visiting that hospital next week. I'm researching treatments for chronic patients. What's his name?" Hesitated for a moment. But something told me I could trust this doctor. Charles Reed. But he's not really my father. Not exactly. I told him the whole story again. Dr. Bennett listened intently without judgment. "If you allow it, Emily, I think I can help you with your legal process. It would be useful to have an updated medical report on Mr. Bright. Reed's mental state. I can conduct an evaluation when I go to the sanitarium if you permit it." It was as if fate was on my side. A week later, Dr. Bennett returned from the sanitarium with news beyond my expectations. "Mr. Reed is in advanced stages of memory loss, possibly from untreated syphilis. He barely recognizes where he is. He's confused and has constant delusions. According to the nurses, he keeps calling for Nathan, believing his son is still alive and visiting him. Did he ask about me or my mother, the doctor?" Hesitated, as if weighing how much to say. "Actually, he doesn't remember you. When I mentioned your name, he asked who that was. When I explained you were his daughter, he got agitated. He said he never had a daughter, only a son named Nathan. That hurt more than I expected. After all that, a part of me still wanted to exist to him, even as something he hated. Being completely forgotten felt worse, but Dr. Bennett's report was crucial for our case. With the medical certificate confirming Charles had permanent mental incapacity, no competence, and no prospect of improvement, we could proceed with the name change without his consent. In September 1962, I finally received the news I was waiting for. The judge approved my request. My children and I could take a new last name. I chose Harper, James's last name. It felt like I was honoring the only one who truly supported me when I needed it most. Emily Harper, I repeated to myself, savoring each syllable. Caleb and Joshua Harper. It sounded good, fresh, new, without the heavy burden of the bloody history we had carried before. But my revenge wouldn't be complete with just that. There was still the matter of the land, the physical inheritance that Charles valued so much, the land where I grew up, where Nathan is buried, where so much tragedy happened. A part of me just wanted to let it go. I didn't want anything that ever belonged to that man. But James, always practical, helped me see that those lands could provide a better future for my children. And there was one more thing to consider. If I gave up the land entirely, it would go to Charles's distant cousins, people who never worked it and might sell it to the first bidder. With Mr. Lawson's help, we filed for land division. The part with the house and Nathan's grave, we sold to cover Charles's medical and institutional costs. The rest would be for my children when they grew up. In November 1962, news came that marked the end of this story. Charles died in the sanitarium from pneumonia that his weakened body couldn't fight. He passed away alone, with no family by his side, calling for the son who was no longer there. I didn't attend the funeral. I just sent a wreath without a card or message. That was the best I could do. A few months later, James proposed to me. He knew it would be hard. I had 2 young children with a complicated past. He came from a good family with a bright future ahead. But he said he didn't care what others thought. He wanted to build a life with me. Emily, with you and your children. We could start over somewhere else if you like. I married James on a Sunday in April, 1963, in a simple ceremony at Lexington Hope Church. Aunt Clara was the only family on my side. Caleb and Joshua, nearly 4 years old, were the ring bearers, carrying the rings with the serious humor that only children can have in formal occasions. 2 weeks later, we moved to Asheville, where James got an offer to manage a larger pharmacy. It was a chance to start fresh in a place where no one knew our history, where we could just be a normal family. A couple and our 2 boys. I never went back to Kentucky. Through Aunt Clara's letters, I learned the land was sold. The house fell into ruin, and the new owners built something else. Even Nathan's grave was lost when the new owners decided to tear down the fences and plant corn over the whole area. The years went by. James was a wonderful father to Caleb and Joshua, who grew up calling him Dad without ever questioning it. When my boys turned 12, Inst thought it was time to tell them the truth. Not the whole story, of course, but a gentler version, that their biological father was a sick man who did bad things and couldn't care for them. James chose them as his own, which made him even more special than a blood father. They accepted it with the surprising naturalness that children sometimes have. So we have 2 fathers. Caleb asked. One who made us and one who raised us. I nodded, relieved to see they understood without bitterness. I like the one who raised us more, Joshua concluded, then went back to playing as if that conversation wasn't one of the hardest moments of my life. In 1975, Aunt Clara passed away at 84. She was the last link to my past in Kentucky. With her gone, I felt like a chapter of my life had closed forever. That year, I made a big decision. I went back to school to pursue my dream of becoming a qualified nurse. James supported me as always, helping with the kids, who were teenagers by then, taking on more responsibilities at home so I could study at night. In 1978, H2, Sanchitsea, I finally got my diploma. It was one of the happiest days of my life. Life went on in its way. The boys grew up and graduated. Caleb became an engineer. Joshua followed in James's footsteps and became a pharmacist. Both married and gave me grandchildren, who became the joy of my old age. James and I built a peaceful life based on respect and friendship, so different from my parents' stormy marriage. In 1993, I lost James to that cruel cancer. It was a deep pain, but different from the others I had felt. It was a clean pain, without guilt or regret. We had lived well, loved each other, and built something good together. Today, at 84, looking back, I see that my revenge was more complete than I could have imagined. I didn't need to lift a finger against Charles. Life punished him with the disease he sought in his adventures, with the loneliness in his final days, with the forgetfulness that erased his name and memory. He wanted to leave a legacy, to pass his name through a son. In the end, his name died with him. His grandchildren, the children of the daughter he despised because he believed she wasn't his, carry a different name, call another man father, and live beautiful lives without ever knowing the evil that once flowed in their blood. If there's justice in this world, this is justice. Not the bloody revenge I dreamed of as a young woman, but the complete erasure of a man who thought his name and blood was so important. My name is Emily Harper, and this is my story. If it touches your heart in any way, please like it so others can know too. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments, because every message makes me feel less alone in sharing this burden. And please subscribe to this channel to follow other stories of women like me who found strength where there seemed to be none.